as a reminder, you will get that. So we're redirecting to YouTube so we can get started in case people are listening in there. And then I always like to turn that off because I get feedback on it sometimes. All right, let's go ahead and start because we've got a lot of really good content. And I want to make sure we get to all of it. I will see if I can go on video here too, if it works okay. Sometimes my bandwidth isn't as good as I would like. So welcome everyone. Thanks for being here today. I'm Hallie Crawford, and we are going to be talking about improving your conflict competence. I think a lot of us have had to deal with this in different ways and more in some ways, especially through COVID, not just when we're working remotely, but, now that we're back in the office and, that, I don't know, just the dynamic and things have changed overall. And regardless of all of that, being able to effectively manage disagreements and conflict of any type or in any way, shape, or form is just so critical to being an effective manager, leader, employee, member of a group. So it's a really big topic that we have to work on a lot with our clients. And we're going to give you advice today that we give to our clients in this free webinar. So I'm a certified career coach. I have been coaching and training for just over 22 years now. It'll be 23 years in March. That's why I've got some gray hair going on in here. I turn 50 next year. My undergraduate degree is from Vanderbilt, and I have a master's degree from the University of Illinois. And I love what I do, and our coaches love coaching our clients. We've got some great coaches on our team, as well as resume and LinkedIn experts. We're talking today about conflict competence. And I started to say a couple minutes ago, why it's so important, but there's some statistics actually that back up why it's so important to be able to manage this kind of stuff effectively. Research has shown that between 60 and 80% of difficulties in organizations, they come from relationships or, strained relationships or conflict between employees versus people's individual contributions or, how good they are at their jobs. It's a big deal. And a typical manager spends a lot of time or can spend a lot of their time dealing with workplace issues. It can be 1 to 2 days of every work week. So it's not something that any of us can avoid or get away from. And what we like to tell our clients is that conflict, I know a lot of us avoid it. I do too. It's not my favorite things. No one's favorite thing, I don't think. But it's an opportunity always to learn a little bit more about the other person. And a lot of positive things can actually come out of conflict if we handle it in the right way. Okay. We talked already about the effects from working from home and, people feeling disengaged and all of that. I think, we've moved past that for the most part, but our priorities, I think, have changed a lot. And in some cases that can impact, like if people, for example, aren't as thrilled about having to come back to the office, that's a possible source of conflict and unease, et cetera, et cetera. So we do have to consider the environment as well as the source when we're dealing with whatever conflict it is we're dealing with at the time. Let me move to the next slide here. It's taking a while. Part of or one of the other reasons I should say is why conflict management is so important and doing so effectively is because this is the model that we use with all of our clients to help them determine their career direction, know if they're in the right fit, and also help them establish their long-term career goals. And work environment is a really critical piece to this model. It's a make or break for your career satisfaction or success in the long run. And conflict or a conflict-ridden work environment or one that you don't feel is authentic or whatever it is can really be a stressor for people and make people leave an organization, as we all know. So here's our agenda. As a quick reminder, for those of you who have just joined us, you should be able to see my slides and hear me. Put in the Q&A if for any reason you cannot. You will receive a copy of the recording of this presentation automatically. So that will happen within the next 24 hours, if not before, just as a reminder. And we are broadcasting on YouTube Live. We're going to talk today about coaching skills that can help you manage conflict and agreements that you can make with people within your workplace. You can use these with your family members too in some cases. Don't tell them I told you that though, haha. We'll talk about 3 foundational kind of coaching skills and tools that will help you with all of this. And we are about to launch our end of year sale to help people get ready for the new year and new career goals, etc. So please feel free to refer a friend to us, or you take advantage yourself, or let them know that our sale will start in the next week. But keep the coupon code below on the screen here on the right. 50 off is the actual coupon code that you can input into the payment page to get $50 off of a coaching package for new clients. Let's take a look at our most common obstacles to effective conflict management. And by the way, just really quickly too, because these webinars are shorter, we will not be doing polls, but we want you to think about the polls, and we don't share the slides because these are, free webinars too. So the 3 most common obstacles, like we have found from our clients to effective conflict management, is a lot of people avoid it, understandably. Some people feel anxious even thinking about it and therefore avoid it or don't handle it well. And some people just flat out, again, understandably, and could be why you're here today, don't know how to handle conflict effectively. So again, they avoid whatever it is. Please know you're not alone. Most of our clients will tell us this. Again, it's not anyone's favorite thing, which is why we're here today. So think about which obstacle applies to you the most, though, because it would be helpful for you to understand what goes on underneath for you, because that is part of the process of getting better at this. If you don't realize that you get anxious about it, or you're really actively avoiding it, maybe even more so in certain situations than you realize, you're not going to be able to make effective changes and be proactive about it. Okay. To be able to manage conflict more effectively, some of the things that we believe or assert are really, really important in the workplace as much as possible. We know this is not going to be perfection, but if as much as you possibly can, you can work towards developing a foundation with your employees or with your peers of trust, of empathy with each other, where they're coming from, what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, what your values are. Having a more direct and honest conversation about what's going on, an effective feedback loop, understanding, this kind of goes along with empathy too, understanding where they're coming from and how they may have a different perspective than you do, and really strong listening skills are some of the foundational things that we want you to think about. Now, this can be helpful as a checklist for you to say, okay, what's going on? Why is this conflict arising? Why is this coming up? And why are we having trouble dealing with it? Because one of these things may not be present, and it will help you know where you need to focus a little bit more. Okay. So the 3 foundational tools we're going to share with you today to help you manage conflict more effectively are: number 1, creating an agreement for how you work together more effectively. Number 2, empathetic listening. And number 3, this idea through coaching of curiosity and leveraging and using kind of the right questions to ask to help uncover what's really going on, gain perspective, empathy, et cetera, et cetera. Let's talk first about tool number 1. So tool number 1 is, it can be informal, but we prefer it to be a little bit more formal. It's almost like you're creating a team charter or a team agreement, but you're doing so in some cases with one person one-on-one. So just by the way, having this kind of agreement can be between 2 people, or it can be within a team. Okay. And the things we want you to think about are listed on this slide. How can we establish guidelines for our communication, for our tasks and our meetings? How do we want to communicate together effectively? How do you prefer to communicate? And am I communicating in that way? Someone who's more introverted, for example, may do better if you email them something to think about it and then talk to them about it the next day. It's having these conversations more openly about how to handle things, even ideally before conflict happens, that can help you mitigate it when it does. You can talk about tasks. Who is assigned to what? Are people playing to their strengths? Meetings, how often do we meet? How should we be meeting? How long those meetings should be? Should they be phone, in person, Zoom call, etc.? It's a really good idea as well to think about the roles you play in a project so that you know clearly what your roles are, because role confusion can cause conflict. It's a great idea too to make an agreement for how to handle conflict or disagreements and feedback. So have a quick conversation about when a conflict comes up, because we know that it will, or a disagreement or whatever it is. How should we handle it? And have an open conversation about that. What we would suggest, if you're following along on the right-hand side here, is when you decide to have this conversation with someone, to maybe step back for a second outside of the conflict and not deal with that for a moment, but maybe say, I know we're having some difficulties here. Is there a way we can come up with some guidelines for how we handle this now and going forward? Ask for their opinion first, and then have suggestions prepared that you would like to recommend, but let them talk for a second, because that will help build that trust, that understanding a little bit more, and your active listening skills. And a couple of questions that you can say to start out the conversation could be things like, on the slide, how can we work together more effectively? How can we get through this collaboratively? And what you'll notice here with these questions, which we'll get to in step number 3 with curiosity and powerful questions, is it assumes a positive outcome. It's not a yes or no answer. That's not possible here with these. And also it assumes a positive outcome. That's why we like these types of questions. Additional things that you can deal with in terms of your team charter or agreement could be, okay, let's make sure we're really clear on our objectives and our tasks, our goals that we're trying to achieve, the roles that each person plays based on their strengths. We talked about that on the previous slide. And talk too about challenges that you think you might encounter. So think about what might come down the pipeline down the road so that you can be prepared for that next one. And milestones along the way so that you know if you're being successful in the project. Feedback, what's the best way to give each other some feedback? Do you prefer email and then we can talk about it? Or can we just launch right into it in a conversation? When you have something like this, even if you've been working with someone for a while and you're starting this right now, that's fine. When you have something like this to point to, it's going to diffuse things a lot faster than it would otherwise and help prevent people from getting defensive, because you've already talked about, here's how we want to handle this, and we agreed on it in advance. So I'd love to hear how many people have made an agreement and with someone in advance about how to handle conflict in particular. Feel free to put that in the Q&A if you'd like to. One thing that I would like to say as it relates to this creating an agreement and maybe having this conversation with someone, whether it's to talk about creating an agreement or to deal with the conflict itself, if you have to have a touchy conversation with someone, it's a really good idea to do a few things on the left-hand side. Set the tone of the conversation before you start. Let them know that you have something to talk with them about that may be a little bit difficult for them to hear or maybe a little bit touchy. And ask them if it's okay for you to share that with them. That asking permission helps bring their defenses down, because already you've kind of come to an agreement of, okay, yeah, we need to deal with this and let's talk about this a little bit more openly. And it's a great idea, like I said earlier, to let them talk a little bit more, maybe upfront or after you share for a second. Again, this active listening can really help build that trust. Just because you're listening to someone, remember, doesn't mean that you're agreeing with them or have to agree with them or go with their opinion, but you're at least giving them that airtime and that space. Pay attention to your body language when you are in a conflict situation, so to speak. Make sure that you're making really good eye contact. Make sure that you're nodding or using your hands or whatever it is to show understanding and empathy. Repeat back some of the things that they've said to you. If you feel like you need to clarify something, lean forward so that they know that you're actively engaged versus like, I'm sitting back here and, I've got attitude, right? And you can either have your hands in your lap if that's appropriate, or, I use my hands a lot. And sometimes I have to be careful to not do that too much so that it's not too distracting during the course of the conversation. But these are things that you can do to handle those touchy conversations, regardless of what they are, a little bit more effectively. Now, if these things aren't working and maybe you've tried some of them, but not all of them, I would encourage you to try all of them at least one more time, let's say with the person. And remember too, that this is part of why, if you need to bring your supervisor into the conversation or go to HR to get their support, that's part of why they are there. But we want you to try these tools first. The reason why we like people to create an agreement, whether it's with the team or one-on-one, and we like both, by the way, is it empowers each person to take better or like more responsibility, I should say, for the relationship and having it be successful, whether it's a team or one-on-one. It establishes boundaries or like clear boundaries for a safe space so that people are able to say, look, I don't do well if you just launch something at me. It takes me a minute to process things. So can you send me something first and then we can talk about it? Or another person might say, no problem, I can do that. But it's really important to me if we can talk about it within 24 hours versus, waiting a little while. So it helps you all establish boundaries for what works for you, but also like, look, we're also agreeing that we are not going to give each other a hard time. We're not going to tell each other what we think, the other person should do. And we're going to be respectful and professional. And it's a great idea, looking at the bottom here on the right-hand side, to create these ground rules to follow for greater clarity, but periodically update it as needs and situations change. Maybe you're working on a different or a new project and you need to look at the roles and maybe they need to change a little bit. And this is a great time to think about these things because starting on it in the new year, it's perfect timing to do this. Let's talk about tool number 2, and this is empathetic listening. I think this picture is kind of funny because my face and my eyes are a little bit intense. So you probably want to tone that down a little bit, maybe not exactly like that. But the idea would be that you're facing each other, you're looking at each other, and you're doing really active listening. Now, I know a lot of people are like, I've heard about active listening before. We hear that all the time. But not everyone actually really knows how to listen and express empathy at the same time and show understanding at the same time too. So we really want you to work on this idea of more empathetic listening, taking more time to listen than talk, and stop thinking about, if you're anything like me, the next thing that you want to say versus really listening to the other person. In coaching, for us as coaches, there are 3 levels of listening. We've got level 1, and this goes for everybody. This is why we're sharing it with you. So it's not just about coaches, but this is how we were trained. Your level 1 listening is your own inner voice. I'm hungry. This meeting is boring. This sounds really hard. When can I get out of here? That's level 1. We need it, but we want to not be in it as much as possible. We want to be in levels 2 and 3 as much as we can, focused on the other person, listening to their words, but also their nonverbals. Have you ever had someone say yes, but you can tell like with their face or their voice or whatever that they're really saying no? This is an opportunity to say, I don't mean to give you a hard time, but are you uncomfortable about saying yes to this at all? Because it kind of seems like that to me. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but could we talk about it for a second? Don't step over things that you're noticing because there could be really important pieces of information in there. Level 3 listening is what we call global listening. It's the energy in the room between the two of you in the group, how it's changing, shifts in attitude, the mode and the tone of the conversation. And the way to get into this is not just listening to their words, but getting into your body a little bit more. And like, does this team feel kind of like, deflated and I need to try to do something about it? Slow people down when they're talking a little bit, if that's feasible for you to do so. And if not really and not appropriate, if nothing else, slow yourself down. When you talk a little bit slower and more deliberately, you're going to notice what's going on around you a little bit more. And we want you to lean into asking questions rather than jumping in and giving advice all the time. And we're going to talk about that more in just a moment. One of our really cool active listening exercises that we'll have our clients do is have a close friend or family member tell you about a problem they're struggling with or something, that they could use some help with or advice, but you are not allowed to give advice. You only are practicing effective and active listening, and you're only allowed to reflect back what they're saying to you, like reflecting it back, repeating back to them what they are saying, and paraphrase it. You're not allowed to ask questions or give no advice, okay? And It might sound easy, but I'm telling you, it's virtually impossible. When we had to do this in coaching school, it was very, very hard for us because as humans, we want to help people. The next kind of step of this would be to have a conversation with someone and only ask questions. Don't give any advice at all. Maybe you can do it at the end, but be really conscious about, I'm only going to ask questions and I'm going to ask really good ones during this conversation. That will help you build that active listening muscle. As part of step number 2 in this effective listening and level 3 listening is to pay attention to what the Gallup organization calls 4 needs of followers. This is their model. They own the StrengthsFinder assessment, which most of you have probably heard about. And what they assert in terms of followers, not my favorite word, this could be any employee of any organization, is that we all need to have these 4 things to feel good about our work and be effective: trust, stability, compassion, and hope. So if you continue, let's say within your team, with an employee, with a team member, continue to butt heads, try to think about what may be going on for both of you. And are any of these pieces missing, either within the team or for either of you? Do you need to build trust with them more? Do they need to have a greater sense of stability that like their job is going to be okay? Are they worried about recession fears? And maybe that's kind of floating in the back of their mind. We had a client use this once and she came back to our next call and was like, this was so enlightening to me. My organization is not doing a good job in 3 of these areas. And this is part of why we are having so much conflict. So noodle on it a little bit. It's a really good one. When you start to think about your own hot buttons, it will help you be better about managing conflict and staying calm. What are your highest needs in terms of these 4 currently right now within your organization? Is the conflict that you're having with someone that you're trying to deal with a clash of values maybe or priorities versus just a difference of opinion? Is it something a little bit deeper than that? And do you understand what your own values are and what theirs are as well? And is that part of what's going on in the conflict? Understanding other people more and these types of things will help you better ask for what you need and work towards a compromise for what they need as well, and help you better self-manage during the times that you're dealing with these kinds of things too. Free strategy session. We always offer these for any prospective client that is interested in working with us. And I wanted to mention this briefly because this is a great time for the new year to get started on your New Year's resolutions. You don't have to do it today, but starting to think about it. I know it's just November. But if you have any friends or family members or anyone that you know that could use some coaching, they're not happy in their job, even if you just get them started like with 1 session or whatever it is, we're happy to honor the $50 off coupon. Just email us at admin@createyourcareerpath. We'd be happy to talk with you or them about coaching to help them get on the right track with whatever career goal it is they need help with. Let's talk about our third and final tool, and this is leveraging curiosity. So we've talked a lot today about being curious instead of giving advice, asking questions to, again, generate that trust, empathy, understanding, all of those foundational things. And the way we want you to think about asking questions is more from like a curious place versus like a demanding place or a preconceived notion place. Have you ever had someone ask you a question and it's, you know, what we would call a leading question because they have an opinion and they want you to answer a certain way? Curious questions don't have those agendas. And so what we want you to start thinking about too is being curious instead of judging or being frustrated or having an agenda. And what we would call, if you look on the right-hand side of this slide here, powerful questions. Powerful questions are questions that are open-ended. They're kind of childlike. They're just very curious. And they will not allow for a yes or no response. So they're similar to the ones that I gave before. And there's some examples here on this slide. What's the best way to accomplish this goal more effectively or without conflict? Again, it assumes a positive outcome and the other person cannot say yes or no. This may seem easier than it is. When we do workshops with people, in person or virtually, which we do all the time, and we have them practice with powerful questions, you'll see people, it's so fun. You'll see people start to ask a question and they realize, oh no, this is going to end up being yes or no. So they either have to back up a little bit with their question and rephrase it, or they have to say a little bit more so that it goes in the non-yes or no direction. So we already talked about asking permission before sharing or asking something that could be tough. But practice using these powerful questions in the next couple of weeks. If I had to choose one thing from anything that we're talking about today, it would be leveraging powerful questions more effectively, because it really helps with the listening, information gathering, what's going on with the other person. And you don't have to necessarily try to solve the conflict in that moment every single time. You could do an information gathering session for a few minutes and say, let's talk about this openly for a few minutes. And then maybe we can, sit with it overnight and think about it or talk about it more tomorrow. So powerful questions can be just flat out open-ended curious, like the ones at the bottom here. And they can also be information gathering. So it's a little bit of both. I wouldn't worry too much about which is which. I would just practice for the moment with open-ended, powerful questions in general. And when we think about being curious and powerful questions, it's really important when we're using this kind of tool or talking with someone during conflict to self-manage and make sure that you're working towards understanding first. Then you can get to stating the facts, and then you can get to the resolution piece. But take as much time as you need to not just show, but get to a better place of understanding each other, because that's the place where you will be able to mitigate or manage the conflict more effectively. If you feel like at all as part of this, your emotional intelligence, could use a little bit of work. This is the book that we like from Daniel Goleman, Working with Emotional Intelligence. You all have heard of this before, I'm sure. We could all use more of it, including me. But this will help your communication, not just within conflict, but outside of it as well. And this emotional intelligence piece is just such an important piece of everything. The 4 things, and let me just get to this next slide here, and then we'll start to close out. I have another webinar, actually, I'm hosting at 1:30, so I will let you out on time, so to speak. But the 4 elements of emotional intelligence that you really want to be thinking about is the self-awareness and you paying attention to how you're reacting to things and how you're communicating. The self-management, staying calm during conflict and knowing, for example, when to ask for help. The social awareness, understanding how your actions and communication impact others. And the relationship management. Do you do a good job of, listening, but trying to understand where they're coming from, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So these are the 4 elements of emotional intelligence we want you to start paying attention to, because they will help you manage conflict more effectively, hands down. All right, before we go today, just as a brief reminder, you will receive a copy of the recording. I would choose powerful questions out of anything because it's the easiest one to implement, but I would challenge all of you as well to create an agreement with a coworker or a team. Try it with someone who it would be easy to do with at the beginning to kind of test things out. And please contact us if you would like more information about our coaching services. Happy to help you. Our coupon code here is on the slide, and you would just email us at admin@createyourcareerpath to set up that strategy session. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. We really hope this was helpful for you. And by the way, happy holidays.